everybody. If you are new to Evenings with Artifacts or Artifacts in general, I'm Ellen Goodwin. I'm the co-founder of Artifacts, and I am your host tonight. My co-founder, Heather Nickerson, is not joining tonight, but she is here in spirit. And our guest tonight is Linda Pordon. I'll introduce her in a minute, but I want to make sure everyone knows that chat's open, and we're going to take your questions as we go along, so please pop them in. And I also want to just recommend that if you haven't already, follow us on Instagram or Facebook or on YouTube. That's where we'll post all the recordings of this after. So you have all of these great resources and existing resources, which I'll put into chat in a second here as well, because Linda has already authored a piece with us, giving us some of the tips that we'll be talking through this evening. So Linda, hi, let me give a little background for folks. So sit tight. I want to give everyone some perspective because I really love people who, like myself, have had a different, chapters of their career that have been major pivots and reinventions and taking pieces of their past selves with them. So with Linda, it's a really interesting background. You're going to love it. And she's more delightful than even a bio can do justice for. Her background is actually finance and mine's economics, so we have that in common right out the gate. And then she went into forensic investigations with PricewaterhouseCoopers, and then she was with American Express in premium product space for over 15 years. And that's where some of the brand and strategy work translates now into what she's doing as a photographer and doing brand photography, interior photography that you have seen in magazines and keep you engaged and excited about what you're reading. So her work is what keeps us all as consumers very happy. She's also a mother, and she has 3 boys, and maybe she'll even tell you about her Halloween costume because it's worthwhile, and hopefully we'll see an artifact about that soon as well. So Linda, thank you for joining us. Hello.
Hi, thanks for having me. I know, as you say it, I was trying to think what's my common thread across everything, and I think it's still storytelling, even if it's like investigatively trying to find some wrongdoing in a corporate white-collar crime. But I think it's always trying to find what the story is, right? Especially with branding, and then finding my way into photography. And it's funny, like while we're having this talk, I'm also developing content to go talk to my children's schools, so to kindergarten, 2nd, and 3rd graders. And I started by saying at the beginning, raise your hand and tell me who here is a photographer. And you get very few people, right? There's like a few kids who are like, maybe they think they are. And then we go through this whole exercise, and they end up each really thinking through and taking a photo. And at the end, after we've done that and they sign their photo, and I talk to them about how they own the copyright to that, I say, who's a photographer? And every hand goes up. So it's always a great reminder. I know I always felt like, when am I a photographer? When I really first started doing it commercially and having people pay me. And you're a photographer. Everyone here is a photographer. And I think that's a very beautiful art to get involved in.
Linda, how long have you been in this transition now into the brand and interior photography?
A few years. I mean, I will say, so I left Amex a little bit after COVID and just kept doing more and more photography. But even while I was in corporate, like I loved it. I would do it for friends and family. Then I started accidentally picking up commercial clients. And I was like, don't tell anyone I'm doing this on the weekend. I don't want to seem like I'm not serious about corporate. And then it had my heart so much that I was like, between children and a full-time job and this creative passion, like where do I break and give? And photography was something that I realized I just didn't want to give on. So.
And you have 2 sides to your work as well, right? So, and I think that's really fun to tell people how we all connected, because you have the prop shop and you have your photography work. So you have an affinity for beautiful objects and how you compose your photography to convey the meaning and the value behind objects.
Yeah, and the things you cherish. And it's interesting now that, because I primarily focus on interior photography, which I think, to take a step back, everyone's like, what does that mean? It's a little bit different. It's not really real estate photography. So most of my clients are architects or designers, interior designers, who are working with their clients on a very special and, really personal space, their own home. So most of my days I'm spending in other people's homes, really seeing how designs and changes are incorporated with a little bit of who they are and a little bit of this old and new. So I love it. It's like shocking to me that I can even found a profession where I can be paid to see other people's beautiful stuff all the time. But
I
yeah,
love.
you could start too with if you want to start with the question you were asked, because I
Well,
think
I
that's
was going to say you just walked right into it. So, folks, I told Linda that once in a while we get questions in advance of a session when people read about what we're going to be covering, and we got one today, and Linda wanted to actually talk about it right up front because it's really a great question. So here's the question. Linda's photos are beautiful, but I always wonder when I see pictures in magazines when the settings look, well, like it's out of a magazine, how much prep work goes into setting the stage? What are the most common challenges that Linda faces in getting great shots inside people's homes to make them feel cozy and let the items they care about pop? That's a loaded question.
Oh, and I was trying to think of like an easy, succinct way to say, but I think what applies to everyone here too, and the biggest piece is editing. So I always say that to my clients. Sometimes we have an on-set stylist. Sometimes there's a creative director. There's the designer themselves. There's me. And also we are in people's homes where we don't want to offend anyone, that things are moving in and things are moving out. So I always say too, when I photograph my own home, my own spaces, my own things that are sitting all around me, I change a lot of things for the camera. So I think it's really editing down what needs to be there, what is helping be like the hero of the space, right? So let's pretend I had a huge art piece behind me. We probably don't want to clutter it with, 10 different small tchotchkes around it, right? So I always say like a shot can't really have more than one hero. So thinking through what you're trying to make people focus on. And then we really take out a lot. I would say I spend more of my time as the photographer looking at the composition, taking things out that people have put in, because it's how do you want your eye to move in a frame? Like I always say, like, I don't want to walk into a couch at the beginning of a shot, right? I don't want to fall into furniture. So how do you let the photo breathe enough so you really get to the thing that matters the most? And there's a lot of supporting characters, right? And everyone has you might tell a color story where this color brings you over to the color in this brick, right? And maybe there's something up here. So yeah, it's really removing distractions. And then there's a little bit, sometimes I see comments in some of my designers' pages and people are like, where are the toys in the playroom? Where are all like the lights in the ceiling? Where's the fans? There's a lot taken out, right? So we always joke, Crate and Barrel licensed photos for me of this gorgeous playroom. And every time they posted it, people were like demanding to see the toys. So we actually had to serve up the photo from the other side of the room that showed all of the built-ins with some of the drawers open with all of the toys, because people were like mad that it wasn't realistic enough. So, I assure you the toys are there. We're just trying to make sure it doesn't feel like real life too much in the moment.
I understand that. I did watch a season of The Home Edit, and they would show these beautiful children's rooms, and I was like, yeah, that's going to last 5 seconds. How is that? But it's the art of the possible, and I think that's the idea.
Yeah, and I think there's like the version of your home and your spaces and everything that looks like almost like the minute someone's going to come in and you're entertaining, and then there's real life. I was laughing with Ellen right before we kicked this off. My son came in and dove over on these pillows over here, so that's the dent. I mean, there's real life. And we were also talking about, which we'll talk more about too, just setting a composition. And right before we went on, I realized I have a lot of naked busts in my house, and there was a butt right here, just kind of coming out of my head, and that's not a good frame to have. That's not a good way to say hello to new people.
Yeah, let's leave that for later. But that's a great point. Let's pop over and talk about some of your top tips, because when we published this article, I just popped the link into chat, we got a lot of really positive feedback. And it's because we hear a lot from folks who are like, how do I take nice photos? Because I tell people I like to cycle. I actually don't say I'm a cyclist. And it's kind of like you saying with the kids, are you a photographer or not? And I think of cyclists as racers, and they're competing and they're training for specific goals. And I just ride my bike. But maybe more than like to the ice cream shop or something. But when we hear from folks who are saying, I want to take better photos, it's almost always that people are trying to get their friends and family to click on their artifact and be engaged. They want them to understand what they see in the object. So that's why we've worked with Linda to provide tips. And the first one that you gave, I think, is what get maybe about 60% of the questions we get about photography. Finding that light. Let's just plunge right in, because light is the demon, but it's also some of the best ways to make things shine.
It's the most fun part to me. So it's something whenever I walk into a space to photograph, I always say I kind of have this list of how I want to photograph, what I want to photograph first, right? Where I want to photograph. Like I always like, if I'm doing a kitchen, I want to get that done early because that takes the most time. It's where people invest a lot of money. My designers want it to look perfect on camera. But a lot of times, I mean, the other day I walked into a shoot and the dining room was like an afterthought. And I walked in and this magical light was pouring in and dancing around. And it was just this like diffused, beautiful. And I was like, I'm not even going to get the rest of my equipment out. I'm just going to shoot this right now quickly. And that photo's on the cover of a local magazine right now. And we definitely did well by doing that first. So I think light is something that is so huge on creating an emotion and making you feel a certain way. Like even like your screen is reading so much warmer than my screen right now. And that makes you feel different things, right? And warmth can be really great. It brings like a intimate feeling. It's always something that kind of makes people feel sunnier and happier. Whereas if you're going to look at a photo and it's really cool and blue, that might make you sadder, or it might make you feel calmer. So there's a lot going on that your light creates. And I generally say overhead lighting is like my least favorite friend. So when you're photographing objects or anything that can move, it's always so helpful to try to bring it to a natural light source. So this always really blows people's minds when I come into a photo shoot and they're like, I have every light on in the house, we're ready to go. And I'm like, if you have a night light on in your basement, that needs to be turned off because I will feel it. So I generally shoot with zero overhead lighting on whatsoever, which is crazy because I'd rather shoot in a room that is completely dark than have a light on overhead. So when you're photographing objects, this is where, Ellen, you and I talked about this. You were like, lighter is better. I think it's also really fun. Like, over here I have all these windows, and at different times of day, the light comes into the window pane and creates these like beautiful shadows and things that, you could play with, and they come across an object, or a rainbow might dance in. And another thing is it's funny, when I go into a house, I'll be like, when does your living room get the best light? And people are like, I have no idea. And I can tell you at like 2:10, given where the sun is, like this is when I like to photograph near this window. So if you're photographing in your own home a lot, you might start to remember and realize like the afternoon light in one of our bathrooms is so beautiful. And that's where I just put cardboard construction paper that you can get at any like craft store, probably even like CVS. And I just put that on top of the bathtub. And that's where I photographed most objects for our shop that we have in my bathroom. Because it has beautiful light, beautiful diffused light. So that's such a great way to get really professional looking images, but also just, it's the most true to color. So if you want to remember that, like I'll pick up something next to me, that this was, the pottery that your grandmother made, and this is what it looks like. You want it to look the way it looks, right? You don't want it to look overly green or orange or anything like that. So bringing it to natural light is going to give you that the most.
And that's actually, really I got a question, Linda, while you're talking just to me, but your bowl is a great example. If you'd hold that up again, the person's asking, I always see any light reflected in it. So they're saying on your bowl, you have a white where the light's reflecting. And so how do you deal with the reflective surfaces with any kind of lighting?
Yeah, so a mixture. If it's really reflective, so something like a lot of times I'm photographing and there is a TV screen in a room, even when you have appliances. So I shoot a little differently where I'm merging many images together, so I have a little more leeway. But you can also try to take any sort of just like black foam core, a black sheet, a black sweatshirt, and just hold it over kind of near those spots, like closer to the light. And then you're going to block where the light's hitting that and creating that overly reflective point. So basically, I mean, black is going to absorb all of that. And white would really be if you wanted to reflect it more and you wanted to make it lighter and brighter. But yes, reflections are like I photograph a lot of like wine fridges and things where the whole, people want to see the wine bottles. So we really have to start. We just take anything black you have. I mean, I have these like scrims and sheets, but it could be, when I started out, I used like shower curtains. I used anything I had to, for whites and blacks. And it's really so easy to do that with things that you have in your house too. You can
That's
take a
fabulous.
shirt.
Do what you can with what you've got. I love it.
Yeah, that's the number one rule in photography. I'm on set sometimes and we're like, oh, this is not what and we're always like, we're going to do what we can do with what we have. Right. That's
Get creative. That's
be
really
too serious about it. The other day we were missing a refrigerator. So
what? Missing a refrigerator?
Yeah. So, we shot around it. I'm joking. And we at least had somewhere to store stuff in a hole.
That's fabulous. And I do think that in the article that we put a link to, you mentioned like bed sheets. That was a perfect example. You mentioned shower curtains, just whatever you have.
So yeah, like a bed sheet, a white bed sheet will block more light. So if you want to do that, that's great. If you have like a shower curtain that's more sheer and you have like too much of a light source, let's say you're photographing outside, you could always hold that overhead even, right? And you can use anything to clamp things on. I mean, even I've been on set and people are using hilarious. I follow this one architectural photographer out, and he's mostly in LA, and he's on these like, fake made ladders, like leaning over with his, and you're like, because there's no tripod that big. So even professionals sometimes are just winging it and using things around the house to get there.
My sister worked for a food magazine, and I remember her telling me once they were on a set and they're shooting food, and that was the object, was the food, and they had this weird shadowing that they couldn't deal with because of some skylights on the set, and they couldn't block them. They used an umbrella.
Yeah,
that's what they were using. They were improvising and they had an umbrella. So,
and a lot of photography equipment, if you start investing, you're like, it's $400 and it looks like an umbrella. So
pretty much.
Sometimes I feel like go with what you have.
Yeah, exactly. Well, let's move on to tip number 2, and lighting, because I think lighting could be its own evenings with artifacts. To be honest, we get lots of questions about that, and I think too people are dealing with the cheats that are in the article, the different kinds of boards that you can use that look like real ones but aren't, are really great cheats for a lot of reasons, including kind of matte versus shiny finishes. People talk a lot about marble countertops or granite countertops reflecting and trying to deal with that. And some of these other surface boards can help. And there's a link for those in the article. Your second tip was about keeping your background simple and consistent. So let's dig into that a little bit.
Yeah, and I think consistent too is so simple. I think it's, I hate when I look at a photo, and I would say this is my biggest critique when I look at a photo, especially when they're like, and you're just like, what are you selling? Like, what is the focus here? So I think a lot of things, again, let's just go back to this, right? Like there could be really great, like maybe grapes go really well in my photo with this, right? And it's like a supporting character that's telling a scene, or a linen napkin. But if I put too many things in that are overpowering this is the last thing I'm looking at. So it's really, negative space tells such a beautiful story. And when you look in magazines a lot, product photography, there will be like a perfume bottle and one thing, trios of 3. So odd numbers are always very pleasing to the eye, but grouping them together, so it creates almost like that's one object. But I think a lot of times people are afraid to pull back and have more negative space, but sometimes that really like makes your eye hone in on that one thing. And for whatever reason, your eye likes to breathe. Like it likes having, when you look at your artifact grid or you look at your social media, it looks beautiful when there's more negative space in there. And a lot of times, if you look at magazines for anything, I mean, I obviously have a lot of interior ones, but the photos on the cover have a lot of room to breathe. And then also, then they can have a lot of room for words too. So when in doubt, maybe back up a step, or really, and I think there's, what I love about artifacts too, is you can put more than one photo. Mm-hmm. So I love where you might have like the big pull away of like, what does this look like? Or what does this look like on top of books in a room, or in my favorite room, and, or my grandma's house, because in my fake story, she made this, right? What does that look like? But then when you really get close, like, what do these waves look like? What is this made out of? And how do I see the texture almost of that? And I think having all of them together is really where it's the beautiful story.
Yes, seeing objects in context, right? And I think we had a story early on at Artifacts, and it was interesting, and we've told it so many times, but such a favorite. These three sons, and they're helping their mother downsize and declutter, and the one son grabs, there's these brass trays, and they've been above the sideboard their entire lives. For decades, they've just been there. That's where they go. But that's not where they're going to go in the new home. And so they were not going to make the move. And the three adult sons are like, yeah, I don't want them, get rid of them. Because they were like, and they're just from Target or Pier 1 or something like that. But they weren't. They were from Kathmandu, and they had the most amazing stories. But when they ultimately were going to take them down, they were wishing, artifacts hadn't existed at that exact moment. They were wishing they had photographed them above the sideboard, which was super sweet, but that was just such a part of their upbringing. That's where they were.
I know. I think that's something, we didn't get into this, but one of the reasons that I love photography and I love writing and I love storytelling and I love artifacts is I have a horrible memory, really horrible. And to me, like, if I visually can see and remember something, like someone was asking the other day, like, what would you grab from, your parents' house or whatever? And for me, my parents actually recently knocked down my childhood home, and they were all like, you can go in and get all of your stuff. And I was like, you know what? If I don't know what's in there, but all I took was all the boxes of photos for everyone. So I have them all here, because to me, as long as I have those photos, I don't personally need the actual artifact or the item. I just want to jog that memory of like what that heart comforter felt like that I had, growing up. Or, we were just talking about Halloween costumes, like with that itchy mask in the 80s, like Halloween costumes now are so much nicer for kids. I'm like, we had one string on a mask and it would just snap off on your face and that was it. Then you held it. But I wouldn't remember that if I didn't have, the photo of us sitting there with my brother as He-Man, right? So I think it's so important to see it in context too, and that's part of the story. And you were talking to me about decluttering too, and I know that's a big focus for a lot of people at all stages of life. To me, that having that photo and that artifact and that like written combination allows me to say goodbye sometimes to the actual object, just like the case that you were speaking about. And I think that's a beautiful thing, to free up physical space and clutter to be able to move on, but maintain that artifact in the memory.
I think you're exactly right. And it was maybe a few months ago when we were doing it. We do these concierge artifact where we'll go to people's homes and help them through the artifacting process so that they can move quicker and do it more efficiently. But what happened was this person was saying, yes, I need to keep that. No, I don't. And they were sending out the artifacts during the decluttering process to their family and saying, this is your last chance. Do you want this or not? And it was really interesting part of the process. But what happened is they got interrupted because the loved ones were like, wait, do you mean it? What else is there? And so they had to like start telling more stories. It was really interesting because there were just so many stories untold. And once they started getting them, they were like, wait, just stop. Don't get rid of anything. And
I
I
know.
think that that's not the solution, because what ends up happening, and this woman told us the same, she's like, and I've told people but more now, is she's held on to some things for so long, they have value to her because she's had them so long. She assumes they're valuable because they've been there for 40 years. And she's had to really pause and say, is it actually valuable to me, and why? And that was what we were doing with Artifacting. So that was really interesting to me. She's like, just because I've had it a long time doesn't mean I need to keep it forever.
Yeah, and I think I really loved going through the artifacting process because it makes you pause and say, like, is this really worth artifacting, right? And if it's not, and I'm holding on to it in a box, but I don't think it's worth it to take a photo of it or write something or go through the effort, then why do I have it, right? Is it actually that important to me? So I love that process that it forces for you, because we were talking about this with, nowadays you can take so many photos. It used to be so hard. I have a colleague of mine for interior photography, and she said, I mean, she started out shooting for all major publications just with film. They would set up film, they would get like 20 shots, they would walk, and they wouldn't know what they got for a few weeks, and that was it. And it was so much more expensive and price prohibitive to take a photo and to develop photos, right? And now I can walk away from a shoot and have like 1,000 photos. So, one of the biggest, most important things that you guys really, it's part of your DNA too, is, I call it culling, but it's to take all of those photos and all of that information and like, what's really important. And I mean, at the end of the day, a full day shoot for me, I might only yield like 25 photos. That's it.
Wow. And do you cull those right away? I realize we're deviating a little bit, but when you're going through and you're taking 1,000 photos and you say, I got 12 shots or whatever it is, are all the others, do you backlog those? Do you store them, or do you kind of wipe clean and keep going?
I store a subset of
Mhm.
them. The 25 are like final. Maybe each one of those has like 5 other ones that I'm merging to make them. And I save that, but beyond that, the rest just goes out the door. And that's something I speak in photography, and I always have. Like if you look at my phone, you're like, how did you take 65 photos today, like barely leaving your house? I don't know. And I screenshot a lot. Again, I want to visually remember everything. So at the end of the day, too, I force myself, when you're just watching TV or kind of winding down, to go through my photos for the day and edit out and curate. Like, you don't need those 60 photos. You actually cared about 3, right? 3 more meaningful. Like we just had Halloween, and I made myself sit there and go through and be like, I didn't need 85 photos of my son as Captain Underpants, but maybe like 5 good ones of him and his friends. So I think
I
that's
think
too.
that's really great to hear from a professional photographer, that you're doing that professionally and personally. And we have an article about that I'm posting into chat now. And it was funny. We were in Cape Cod and I was trying desperately to catch that whale coming out of the water.
You take a
And
bunch.
hundreds of photos just to get that whale tail, right? And it just becomes clutter of its own
And if you
variety.
don't remember to go back, you can't find that one,
You
right?
can't find it.
I
You
think
know,
that's
sometimes I favorited things. My favorites are polluted, like you know.
yeah. And that's part of like adding to your workflow then
Yeah.
of those, what from there maybe in a week, right? So kind of letting that time pass too. What in a week might you think is worthwhile to potentially artifact?
Absolutely.
So a
One
lot of that, like you can't keep every photo. You can't take photos of everything because, it does take time. So how do you really curate within there? And for my design clients too, I do that on set. We will be staring at a space and I'm like, it's beautiful, but it's not translating editorially. Like, are we sure we want to take this photo? Because it might not be worth it. It might not tell the story that you want to tell about the space. So kind of always knowing what not to take is also important too. So you can prioritize time, resources, all of that.
How does the consistency in your tip, you talk about your background, simplicity and consistency. How does the consistency of your choice and background play into the story that you're trying to, and the emotion that you're trying to convey?
I think that's really fun. So when I started and kicked off Prop Shop, which is vintage homewares, which really helps. We bring them as prop, as the name implies. We bring them as props on shoots, and a lot of times the designer buys them or the homeowner buys them. But I really thought through like, okay, this is an entirely different Instagram. Like what color scheme do I want it to have? What mood? I wanted it to feel older and antique, right? So a lot of the visuals there are darker and deeper or really photographed in shadows. But, I photograph for a really amazing local brand. It's called Love Corn. And if you haven't had these tasty snacks, they're nut-free, amazing, healthy. I eat them like 24/7. But their brand is so fun to photograph for commercially because it's pops of color. And they have multiple brand colors. They have a lot of negative space. If you see them on Instagram, it's at Love Corn. And it's just colorful and bright and beautiful. And that evokes a different thought for me, that it's this like fun, clean, great product. It's something that makes me feel like I can eat it myself. I can give it to my kids. So that's a completely different brand. And obviously, when you're taking photos for yourself, you're not a brand per se, but it is really beautiful to start to create a consistent look and theme. And whether that's like, my mom loves blue. If she, like, I could see her just having all different shades of blue, right? And that's so easy to do too. You could just even use cardboard and just paint it different shades of blue, right? A lot of things can be done easily, and kind of what brings you happiness too as you tell your story, and how do you share yourself more? So I think that's always helpful. Like you were saying, photographing on a marble countertop, or for some people, maybe you just have nice wood floors. Use those, and creating something that all the photos go together a little bit more. I think makes your artifact board. I know this is like the weirdest thing, and I've read about it, that there's memes about this, and I'm going to admit that I do it, but where like I look at my Instagram or my artifact tiles and I'm like, that looks pretty. Curated a collection of photos that go together and feel pretty. And that's really important when you're talking commercially for any brand, any designer. Your work needs to look like your work, and people need to kind of understand who you are. And a lot of that is done with backgrounds and colors. But it's such a great way to try to express who you are while you're artifacting too.
Linda, I couldn't love that more. And I would like to guiltily admit it was last week and I still have it and we're going to use it. I had a moment with my own artifacts collection, the first row. They just look so perfect together. And I was like, and people are always asking us.
I'm doing well. And then sometimes I post one, I'm like, oh no.
I know. Well, people always ask us, what have you artifacted recently? And I was like, well, I should just tell them, like, and this arrangement looks pretty, but I'm artifacting all the time. So I don't think about, there isn't a composition, right? I'm artifacting in the moment, but it was really funny. I'm like, for once, they all look presentable.
And there's ways too, like maybe you're really into florals and you want to always pick something that's seasonal or something from your backyard and just add that little thing in. There's so many ways to kind of show yourself while doing it. When we did prop shop, it was really important that people knew how big things were because they were buying them. So, and they were all different items, right? It's not like we were making widget 1, 2, and 3. So all I had on hand, and we still laugh, it was like our mascot, the lemon, and the lemon is like every photo, but it was funny to us, and it brought us a lot of joy. And sometimes that's all you need when you're taking photos or doing anything artistic.
That's
find your version of the lemon or the flower. Yes. And that's also like you're artifacting something from your past, from your life, but you're also telling a story in your own voice. So that's a fun way to do it.
We did have one person write to us at Artifacts, and she said she gave up on taking pretty pictures. And she said, I gave up, but now I add video to all my artifacts. And she shared one with me, and I love it so much because it was not only shiny, and that was something that was driving her crazy. It was a utensil in the kitchen. It was metal, silver metal, but it's not a utensil you see very much as a French antique. And so her video is actually showing how to use it. And it was fabulous. And she's scolding her children in the video, telling them, now don't do this. Like it was hilarious. It was her personality was all over that artifact. And she was frustrated because she couldn't communicate it with the photo. So she migrated to video, and I was like, great job. Like whatever works for you, go
However,
for
you're
it.
comfortable telling that story. And I
Yeah.
think that's true too for everything with artifacting. I do love, because I love both sides. I really love writing and I love taking photographs. I love it all. But you might index more on one or the other, and the other's kind of the supporting character to it, right? And that's great too.
Well, let's move on to the third tip. I would say third and final, but this one was a really big tip. It has multiple layers to it. So think and pause before you snap, which I think there's a general aversion to nowadays because our phones in particular are just right there and there's no cost to just snapping away. So please unpack that and give us some more context to it.
Yeah, so this is going back to the where I'm going into my son's young classes. So that's the exercise that I have them do. It's this like art Dawson thing, but you go in and you get to present to them. And again, so they've all told me most of them aren't photographers. And then we go through a little exercise and introduce them to an artist, and then go through some tips of photography. But I make them really write down and think. They walk the room and decide, what am I going to photograph? What's really like, what do I think is important and beautiful to my eyes? And I always say it could be anything. It could be the pen that you love using. It could be like the window that you sit at. It could be an eraser. Just pick what you think you can bring beauty to. And then they go back and sit and write down, like, what are they trying to show when they photograph it? Are there any features? What might they put near it or not? So they really think through before they act at all. And then they're given a Polaroid camera to take one photo. And it's really bringing them back to like film. And then they take that photo and they think about, right? Like we talk about, are you going to pull in really close? Are you going to come out? Are you going to put anything next to it? So they go through almost a checklist of what, on set as a photographer, you're doing in 2 seconds. And they think through all those areas of lighting and composition. I mean, for kindergarten, it's dummied down. But then they take the photo the way they intended to. And I always say before they get the camera, go around and just do this. And I think that's a really great thing in life and in everything, is just pause, really be meaningful, because it's so easy nowadays, just the amount of like data and everything around you and the ability to take photos. There's just so much, right? We're so overwhelmed with content and things. So it's taking that moment to pause and really think about the story of the item and like why, again, my favorite bowl. Like, why is this so important? I want to get the ridges. What do I think it should be featured with? What are like, this is signed on the bottom by the artist. That's really important to me. And that's something that makes it so special. It was actually my friend, one of her first pottery pieces. It's not really my grandmother's, but this is so special to me. And part of it is the signature, right? So thinking through that before just snapping 20 photos of it.
Well, in a very practical case, but I want to stay on this with some of your other layers on this tip, but on a very practical basis, we like to remind people, if you are artifacting with the intent to add things to an estate plan or to insurance, you actually need to think about that in advance, because you will definitely need that maker's mark on the bottom of the bowl. You'll need a picture that shows the entire object as well as different angles on it that would help for a formal legal appraisal, for example. And so going in, if you have these other intents to use your artifacts in those ways beyond capturing the memories, you have to know that going in, or you can always edit, but it's helpful to just, when you have it, to take those different angles and get all that information all at once.
Yeah, and I always ask my clients in our prep call, I'd say, like, what are you using these photos for? Which seems maybe obvious, right? Like to sell their services or product. But a lot of times they're like, I'm building my website and I don't have a lot of content. And then we talk about, I'm like, well, then you probably need a lot of horizontal images for your landing page. Let's talk about that. Then maybe it's really important for you to get more shots of details when maybe you've designed less bigger spaces, right? Or it's really important to have your own photo out there as a bio shot, because people need to get to know you. So it really depends, like, what are they trying to do? Some people are like, I want to be featured in a magazine. I'm like, okay, we are trying to take the most editorial shots. We need to show. Magazines are obsessed with knowing how one room goes to another. So if I had a photo of this room and a photo of my kitchen and we don't know how they go together, it's not going to work well. So just knowing the goal and intent, like you said, are you trying to catalog this for your memories? Are you using it for estate planning? Are you trying to share this with others? And that's really helpful too.
And I think it also takes the burden, and we talk a lot about the story burden at Artifacts because we hear about it a lot from the community. People are frustrated by people trying to ask them 20 questions and tell your whole life story in 30 minutes, grandma. These kinds of things are frustrating for people who aren't comfortable answering those questions, don't know the answers, don't think of themselves as writers, whatever it is. But a well-composed photograph can speak volumes, even with a little bit of story behind it. I think we should hit the one that's going to fire you up, which is, I just remember how passionate you are on this, grid lines.
Yeah.
Let's talk about things being crooked and how this makes you feel.
Now I'm going to be mean. No, now I'm going to get strict. I'm like, do whatever you want that makes you happy, but don't take a crooked picture. I mean, occasionally there's a reason, but who just sent one? Oh my goodness. I mean, which one is it? Kourtney Kardashian? Who's the one that's married to Travis Barker? Their wedding photos were beautiful and they were crooked, and like not intentionally crooked, like just kind of crooked, and that's something that I think as an interior photographer and architectural photographer, I've learned that like it really matters. So you don't want to be like panned down, you don't want to be panned up, right? You don't want to like take this photo like this. And I was saying to Ellen, I obviously like need things to be symmetrical the way I'm even sitting. Exactly. But I think that's the biggest thing that makes things look more professional is just trying to hit it head on or overhead, and just not being like a little bit askew. And that's where I love, there's a lot of apps you can use, but this is not an ad, but the Lightroom free app has just a grid lines function with one button, and it, generally speaking, like 8 out of 10 times will give you exactly what you need.
I use it on my phone all the time. Right. I took pictures for Artifacts. We got these fun custom Nike Air Force One, Air One, whatever they're called, shoes. It always makes me think of the president's airplane, which is very confusing. But we got these shoes, and when you hit the crop button on your phone, it shows the grid lines, or at least on mine it does. And I'm like, I was tilting the sole of the shoe to be flat because otherwise it just feels uncomfortable.
And you can set in the article that I wrote, you can set your grid lines. Like when I go to take a photo, I see them. And I think that's really important that like my husband and I just went away for our 10-year anniversary. We went to Portugal, and every time we handed someone the phone, I was like, what just happened? It was like this, like too zoomed in. I'm like, I'm wearing a dress. So just like, when you're taking a photo, this seems so simple. Just hold your phone like this, like just really like pause for a second, and just with a real camera, you'd hold it on the bottom and make sure it's stable. But just like don't like, just take the minute. And if it doesn't bother you, it doesn't bother you. It's just the thing that will make photos look more professional or not.
Yeah, absolutely.
Also just know that Kardashian wedding was crooked, so I guess it's okay.
Well, if it makes you feel better, my dog and I walked by this house that was recently remodeled, and it's beautiful. But I actually can't look at the house while we're walking by it because it bothers me so much that it's a double door front, and the walkway up to it is 2 sets of flat square stones, like walking up to it, and the middle between the stones doesn't align with the middle of the door. It's off by like 3 inches. And there's no reason. It's not like there's a tree. I just want to shift them over by 3 inches so it lines up.
There's a whole Instagram account. It's kind of like the manifestation of this, like crooked, non-symmetrical, like someone didn't think with design, but I think it's called like, please hate these things.
Oh, that sounds fabulous.
It's all like a molding that doesn't match, like everything's just like off. So just being intentional.
I love that. I love it. So let's talk to, we have one question here, and we're getting folks, if you have questions, please pop them into chat where Linda's happy to take them, technical or non, or if you just want to hear more about how she got into the business or how she got into Elle Magazine and all these amazing places, but please pop any questions into chat. One of the questions that we got, Linda, and I was going to write you about this when we published the article with you, was about people are fearful of the editing process and how far to go with it, and just in general hitting that edit button and seeing so many choices. Help people out. Like, when you're at home, what does this mean? How do you translate what you know professionally into home photography?
It's overwhelming, and I think like bad editing or editing without knowing and going too far also makes things kind of look bad, right? So that's where I would say, again, back up, try to get things right in camera. That is, I always say that on set where people are like, could we Photoshop this later? And I'm like, can we get it right in camera? Because there's nothing like getting it right in camera. So if you've moved over to beautiful natural light and you're taking things in a great composition and you're holding your phone straight, your phone should be pretty close to, I'm actually on this like female interior photographer forum on Facebook, and someone was just complaining that a client has like an assistant come on shoot and ends up like taking all of their shots with her phone as all the lighting's set up, right? And they're looking pretty good. It's not the same and it's not the same resolution, but the point being, you can get pretty far as long as you focus on lighting. Your iPhone is amazing. If it's taking bad photos, it's probably because you're in bad lighting. You're not looking at what's around the photo, right? I was saying like there was a case where someone took a designer's photo and there was like the hat over the kitchen lighting and it looked like she was wearing like a nun's hat on accident. So just like thinking through all of those things, I think is so important. But editing goes a long way. I'm not going to lie. If you're doing it right, it's like your straight out of camera should look pretty good. It should not be super embarrassing, but there are tips and tricks, and it's really interesting now with AI. I wonder how soon you guys will be able to almost have the breadth of tools available without all the pain that we've been having. So it's like a photographer's least favorite phrase on set or anywhere is you can just Photoshop that, question mark or period.
Oh,
And because it's hard. If Photoshop was easy, every person would be Photoshopping themselves, the room, they'd be adding pillows, they'd be doing, and it's a lot of work at the current moment. But I think there's like, like I said, the Lightroom app I love. I recommended Color Story. I think once you find either a preset or just a combination of a few things that work for you, that can get you pretty far. So I would say like, keep it simple with editing. I said this, but like bring your shadows up generally, because that's what makes things kind of just look dirty and dark. Not necessarily exposure, but I always bring my shadows up, my highlights down, which really balances my image. And then think through, like, do you want it warmer or cooler? Do you want to play with the temperature? But even that Lightroom app has the ability, like if I wanted to just put my finger on that and remove that in the app, it takes 2 seconds.
I love it.
It's kind of fun too. So I guess I would say don't be overwhelmed. I'm completely self-taught with photography, and I've learned most things from the internet. So if you even Google how to do it or how to work on it, I'm sure there's like a very simple tutorial. I think it's easier than you think it is.
Linda, that's beautiful. I'm actually going to go play with a few photos. Actually, I put the tip there: bring shadows up, highlights down. One question came in directly to me. This when you were in Portugal, did you bring a fancy camera or just your iPhone?
So that's a good question. So because I'm so overwhelmed by always having such an editing queue to get to, I really didn't want to go and take a million photos. So I took one film camera. And that was it. So I took, I want to say 7 rolls of film with me. That's what I happened to have on hand. And I think I took 5 rolls only. And I was really thoughtful about what I took. And they're really cool because they're film. I don't usually get to shoot film. And it was just lovely. It was a creative joy for me to do that. So, I walked away with very few photos, but they're very special. And I wanted to make sure I did that because if I brought my digital camera, I mean, after that many days, I would have come home and been overwhelmed with how much I needed to cull and edit and put through my process, because how could I not?
Where do you even buy film? I actually have my first big purchase was when I was going overseas to go to school in Sweden, and I got a camera and 35 millimeter film. And I was actually thinking about taking it out and letting my daughter use it. But I stumbled because I was like, can you just go to Target and buy film? I don't even know. So I was like, I have to actually look that up.
Any camera store, and then like I could tell you which one, but like I buy my film on Amazon because
Oh, do
I'll
you? Okay.
be here soon. But there's all depending on the type of camera you have, there's different types of film. But then what's really fun, so like we just did our family shoot, and we're not normal, so we did it with a photographer where she had 5 rolls of film. That's it. I told her I want nothing posed. We were just gonna let the kids run on the beach, whatever she got in 5 rolls. And one of the rolls we used an expired roll, and an expired film is really, it could be anything. And ours ended up being black and white and somewhat damaged, but I love it. They have like lines through them, and I don't know, it's kind of embrace. Again, this is where I don't think photography needs to be perfect, but they tell a story, and it's very beautiful.
I love it. I'm just putting that into chat. That's really great. You actually,
You'll like this. My one film camera I got from an estate sale, and it was a man who was clearly a photographer, and he had this whole case of like he clearly loved it. He had this gear, and he had photos that they were selling, and I asked the kids there about like where what did he take photos of, what was his background, and they really had such a gap of knowledge of this camera. And I don't know who he is, but I still feel like I'm carrying on that legacy and that artifact. And for him, I wish his children and grandchildren knew more of his journey as a photographer.
I love that. We just did a workshop. Actually, I live in Austin, Texas, and Artifacts with another company called Vividpics. We did a workshop together here at the George Washington Carver Black History Museum and Genealogy Center. And this woman came in, and her brother has been a photographer, she said, since he could walk, but really a photographer for decades, and has all of this beautiful work, but it's not digitized, it's not archived. And now that's what she's trying to do as a gift to him. And that's why she was there, was to talk about how she could digitize it with Vividpics and other companies, and how she could work with Artifacts to capture the stories behind the photos, because he's photographed historic moments in the Black history community, in their family history, and she's really afraid that it's gonna be lost. And I thought,
how do you carry that on when you're not the one who's like owning, especially now. I always say to my husband, this is so morbid, I hope you guys don't think this, but I'm like, if I die, I have a Dropbox link, and I'm like, this folder is the photos that you use of us and the children, not the ones that you take that are like up shots of me, like slept in 3 weeks. And it's like, I'm like, these are the photos, but how do you give the right digital footprint to other people taking those?
well, there are services for that. We could do, and we are in the spring, we're actually going to do an evenings with Artifacts in the spring, all about digital vaults and in how to be better prepared for any eventuality. Because I got dinged on it by someone actually in a review, said, Ellen said, and I do say this, if I die tomorrow, my daughter will know me by my artifacts, because it's true. They're full of my personality. I've even artifacted my passport and stamps in it that tell, like, talking about the first time I went to Russia, and as someone who's former intelligence, that was terrifying to step into Russia. Like, you will let me go home, right? But it was, my artifacts are full of my personality, and I think that being prepared with photographs or otherwise is really important. Linda, I know we're close on time.
Not to lose it on the journey. I've had more than a computer crash. I have hard drives crash all the time. Really be careful.
Yeah. Oh no, for sure. I really want people to hear, and I don't know the answer to this, but you recently took a brand new casual headshot, and the photographer was interesting, and I wanted to know about their creative process. Can you share with folks who took the photos and what the creative process was?
So most of my bio shots are taken by my children, because they happen to be the ones that are home when we can do it, and good lighting. and they're little, so they're 5, 7, and 9. And they all want to take it. So I generally like I let them pick some things. We do a few different versions. They get to add props sometimes, but at the end of the day too, I love that they're seeing I get to see myself the way that they see me. So I think that's more important than anything. And it makes me love it so much. And I was just telling Ellen, we just took our a family photo for Halloween, but it was very our theme was Overboard, the movie, like the original with Goldie Hawn, and it's my favorite movie of all time. But we needed to take this in front of a boat, so we get to the boatyard, and no one is there. So we set it all up, and I have everyone in it, and then my other son goes back and like hits the timer thing, and we take the photo. So we're like, he took our family photo, and they take a lot of pride in that too. So if you ask my children, they will tell you they're all photographers. They all have little cameras, and we have the Polaroids. And I think that's a really fun exercise too. If you even get a disposable camera and just walk around and say, like, I have 30 photos to take at this trip. It's really fun to see that.
I
Yes.
love it. What a great note to end on this evening. The time has flown by. I don't see any questions in the chat. And if anyone wants questions, you have questions as they pop up after, you can reach out to us at Artifacts. We'll get them to Linda and get an answer. We can do an epilogue. We do that when we get a lot of feedback, like we did when we wrote about family keepers. So Linda, thank you so much. And for everyone, thank you for joining. Next week, we are featuring a panel, and it will be 3 professionals in the downsizing and decluttering. And we'll be focusing on getting ready for the holidays and their best tips to how they do it and how they help their clients to do it. So that will be our theme next week. And we hope you'll join us. We'll be posting this, like I said, on YouTube and on our website in Articles by Artifacts. We have a post just for Evenings with Artifacts, and we post all the great content there too. So everyone, thank you. Linda, thank you.
Thank you
It's a
guys.
pleasure. Good night, everyone.
Night.